Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Both Nathan and Alan sent me this story. It's an update to a story we covered quite a bit a while ago, and it has to do with the idea of home equity theft by the government. And that's exactly what it is. And so imagine a situation where you own a piece of property, and let's say you own it free and clear, and somehow you fail to make your tax payments one year. Just for whatever reason, you miss your tax payment. So let's suppose that you owed $1,000 in taxes that didn't get paid. Well, the government can take your property and auction it off to get themselves paid the back taxes. So if the property is worth substantially more than the back taxes, what happens to the surplus? In many states, the state would just keep it and just say, well, you forfeited that when you didn't pay your taxes. And people have been screaming about this for years, to the point where the U.S. Supreme Court said that is contrary to the law. It's wrong. I believe it was a unanimous decision. And despite the fact that ruling came down, some states, like the state of Michigan, have still been fighting it on other grounds, saying things like, well, we can't do it in the future, but that doesn't mean that we get in trouble for what we did in the past. And there are people who lost their property and all their equity who are saying, no, I want my money back. And so this right here is huge. Michigan's Supreme Court has now said that people who want to get their money back can. The Michigan Supreme Court said Monday its 2020 decision stopping local governments from keeping cash windfalls from the sale of foreclosed homes can be applied retroactively, meaning that hundreds of millions of dollars could potentially be returned to people who lost properties over unpaid taxes. Local governments were essentially stealing from people, said Christina Martin, an attorney at the Pacific Legal Foundation, who argued the case for former property owners. It doesn't matter if it's going to be expensive to pay them back. They have to pay them back. The counties are now saying, look, we understand that we can't do it anymore, but we can't afford to pay it back. See, that's not a defense. Can you imagine you catch a thief stealing something? You caught me, but I spent the money already. Okay. So for years, counties kept profits from the sale of foreclosed homes or land, even if the leftover, the surplus, far exceeded the amount of unpaid property taxes. And the Pacific Legal Foundation and others call it home equity theft. So they like to give the example, and of course, we understand this is an extreme example, but this happened. A man owed $8.41 in taxes on a rental property he had in Southfield, Michigan. $8.41. With penalties and interest, it climbed it to $285. $285. Oakland County sold the house for $24,500 and kept all the money. So they got $24,500, and $24,200 and change was surplus, which they just kept. And what possible argument is there morally for why they should be allowed to keep that money? If your car gets repossessed and gets sold at auction to pay the deficiency, well, once that's paid off, if there's a surplus, that is in other words, they pay the loan off and there's money left over, well, they pay the towing and all that stuff, but if there's money left over, it goes back to you. And likewise, if your home gets repossessed by the bank or foreclosed upon by the bank, and the bank auctions it and gets more than they're owed, minus the auction fees, you get the surplus. That's how it always works. Except it didn't work that way with the states. It's a no-brainer, Martin said. Writing for the court, the justice said the case involves governmental violation of the constitutional rights of numerous individuals. It involves governmental violation of the constitutional rights of numerous individuals. He said, we're not without sympathy towards the communities that kept the surplus cash because state law had allowed it. Nonetheless, the problem originated with the legislature. At the foundation of our government is the precept that no state officer or local government can justify a constitutional violation on the basis of a statutory directive. So they can't go, well, gee, it's unconstitutional, but the law said we could do it. It was an unconstitutional law. Michigan was not alone. Martin said more than a dozen states were doing this. And then the United States Supreme Court unanimously struck it down last year. There's a case out of Minnesota. And the Supreme Court, in a rare moment of unity, I'm joking. I know that there are often unanimous cases, but Phil Ellison, another attorney for former Michigan property owners, said tens of thousands of people now might qualify for payment. I've spoken to Phil. I've done a bunch of stories that involved Phil. And a lot of times I read these stories and I dump the names out because I know that if I ask you right now, what's the name of the attorney for Pacific Legal? Some people are going to go, and it was Christina Martin. And she did a great job, by the way. And I'm not trying to belittle anybody by leaving names out, but when you're hearing a story you've never heard before and people are throwing names at you, the names don't stick. So Phil Ellison is an attorney who actually has called me a couple times after I did stories on cases that he was involved in. And he's done that several times to enlighten me and say, by the way, Steve, just so you know, I can give you some insight that wasn't in the news. And he'll tell me these great little tidbits of stuff. And some of those things I think I have mentioned in future videos. That is, in that sense, ahead of the phone call with him. Obviously, I haven't done anything now in the future yet. But the Michigan Municipal League, which represents local governments, argued against making the decision retroactive, saying communities shouldn't be penalized for following what was allowed under law. Complying with this ruling could cost hundreds of millions of dollars, they warned. The result is potential fiscal chaos across the state, as local governments will be forced to either cut services or raise taxes and fees to make up the holes in their budgets. That's what they said in their court filing. But of course, keep in mind that the law was passed. There was a decision in 2020. There was a decision in 2023. And pretty much everybody knew this was going to go this way. And their excuse is, well, we can't give the money back because we spent it. Okay. Now, unfortunately, some people are going to point this out. It's true that they may have to raise taxes to make up for this. But when I look at the grand scheme, the grand balance of things, I have to look at it and go, but what's right? What's right? So the guy who owed the $8.41 in taxes, it became $285. He deserves that $24,000 back. He does. So, one way to look at it is, well, yeah, they got to raise taxes now to make up for this. All those same taxpayers got a break back when they were taking money from people like this and spending it. And I've mentioned before that this is one of those maxims. It's one of those laws of how things operate. And that is the government spends money. They're really good at it. They spend money. In fact, they're so good at it that they constantly spend more than they have. So, it's weird. If I put gas in my car, I can only drive it so far. Imagine if you could drive your car farther than the gas tank allowed. Well, that's how the government spends money. How much money we got? Okay, let's spend more. And they do. Okay. So I've mentioned before that one of the reasons it was so hard to get this to stop, even though everyone knew it was wrong, was that the government had opened a spigot, and there's money flowing out of the spigot, and they're spending it, again, faster than it came in. And when someone comes along and says, hey, you know something, guys, morally, you should shut that spigot off and stop doing what you're doing. The government will not shut off a spigot of cash until they're ordered by the U.S. Supreme Court, the Michigan State Supreme Court, and public outrage. And even then, here we are. And the first attempts to stop this were back in 2020. And it's taken this long for the message to come across that it was wrong, you can't do it anymore, and you got to pay the money back. And now it looks like they're going to. They're going to have to. So both Nathan and Alan, thank you for sending that. From the Associated Press, Michigan's High Court gives big victory to people trying to recoup their cash from foreclosures. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. I now have a PayPal account that accepts Cayman Island quarters.